Bryce and I agree that AI technology presents a number of potential risks, especially for human well-being. But I think we're excited particularly about this conversation because we agree with you on that. I think we all come from a right-of-center perspective here. And we want basically a path forward for AI that works for Americans, and especially the next generation of Americans. I think we're concerned, like, is this going to work for our kids and grandkids? And I'm familiar with both of your work, Shane and Joe, and actually really respect the point of view that you guys come from. So I'm excited about the dialogue because I think we can hopefully talk through some of the very serious concerns that we all share. But ultimately, I think Bryce and I see a path forward where AI technology can actually shift opportunity towards the people who have been disadvantaged in the previous paradigm. So we think about sort of the middle American skilled tradesmen, or sort of the industrial operating businesses in America, people who've been really hurt by offshoring or by financialization from private equity or software as a service lock-ins from Silicon Valley and the rest. We think there's a pathway where AI can basically shift more power and autonomy to some of the people who we wish had it up to this point. There are still plenty of risks, but that's a part of where we will actually want to take the conversation, is arguing that over the next decade or two, there could be sort of a golden age that emerges, and AI will play a role in it. And there will be lots of challenges and lots of serious things where we'll need to adjust policy, and there could be people along the way who we need to basically make sure that we minimize the number of risks for people and Americans along the way. But that's the side that we'll be taking. Bryce, maybe you want to add?
Yeah, there's one thing that I want, if Bryce, if you could expand upon it. One phrase that you used, you said a narrow pathway. How narrow do you think the pathway is? Do you think that it's more likely that there are going to be more negative consequences from the use of AI, or do you think that it's more likely that there will be positives, or do you think it depends on who's in control?
Look, with any technology, the positive and the negative are really closely intertwined. And I think our role as people who are hopefully going to be able to shape the future of AI is to actually split those apart and figure out what are the bad elements that we can avoid. For example, the psychotic episodes that AI as chatbots are bringing people into. Or, for example, trying to automate away all work or ruin education with cheating apps in AI, right? We want to split out those negative elements and try to mitigate those. And ultimately, I think it'll be a lot of pros and cons, but just like with social media, just like with the internet and even trains or electricity, there's going to be both positive and negative.
Joe, what's your feeling overall about the outlook that Bryce and Nate have? Do you think that that's in any way realistic, or do you think that it's all pie in the sky, that this is just a terrible idea that we should all fear? And to that point, if you do think that it's a terrible idea, we don't have the ability to prevent other countries. So how do you think the U.S. would be best served moving forward, considering Russia, China, there's going to be AI companies all over the world. And if the United States does prohibit it here, these companies are just going to go offshore. They're going to go to other countries.
Yeah, there's a few different questions there. So to the first question, how do I respond to the position presented here? I'm not sure what we're going to argue about. I agree by and large, although I as a writer, I have zero use for AI. And so it's very domain specific, right? If you're in finance, you might have a lot more use for machine learning than I would. And a lot of writers use AI to basically plagiarize, cheat, and offload their work to a machine. Yeah, the question of U.S. competitiveness, especially in regards to China could leap ahead. It's really a volatile situation with AI because it's simply transferring techniques and information and the technology to build these systems is all that's required for another country to begin building close to the level or approaching the level of the U.S. right now. But this is all driven by the U.S. The AI race is driven by the U.S. The AI industry is by and large centered in the U.S. And the arguments made by people like David Sachs or Mark Andreessen, sort of dismissive position is in regards to the downsides, it's completely reckless. I think probably disingenuous, although I don't know their hearts. And I can see from a national security perspective, if you have a very effective algorithm or AI or AIs that are used to, for instance, simulate the battlefield or analyze surveillance data or target an enemy. Yeah, that I think is something that should be taken very seriously. On the other hand, the way they're talking about it, it's as if flooding the population with goon bots and groomer bots is going to be essential to American competitiveness. And I don't see how having what right now, at least statistically, however much you trust surveys, to have a third of Gen Z students basically offloading their cognition to machines to do their homework, I don't see how that's going to make the U.S. competitive in the long term. And the production of AI slop, the sort of relationships, the bonding that inevitably occurs with someone who doesn't either make themselves unempathic or sociopathic or is just born that way. The way large language models and even to some extent the image generators and video generators work, they trigger the empathic circuits of the mind. One begins to perceive a being on the other side of the screen, inside the machine. I think that the social and psychological impacts are already evident and are going to be severe. The economic impacts, kind of up in the air, it's an open question, but it doesn't look good. And the mythos around existential risk, the AI is going to kill everybody or become a god and save everybody. Again, the likelihood of that happening, probably low, but I think that mythos itself is driving most of the people who are at the top of the development of this, and I think that has to be taken very seriously. It'd be like if you had Muslims, for instance, that ran all the top companies in the U.S. and supported by the U.S. government. Maybe you like it, maybe you don't, but it's something you should take very, very seriously.
There's one point that you made that I actually want to kind of drill down on. You said that it was really that AI development was driven by the United States, and is it really driven by the U.S.
Yes.
as in like? Is it only because the United States is doing it, or is the tech actually a human universal that all countries actually would go after? Because it's my sense, like we said, we talked about China or you talk about Russia. I don't think that just because the United States is on the leading edge of this technology, I don't think that in the absence of the United States, these technologies would not develop.
Most of the innovative techniques come out of the U.S. and all the frontier labs are in the U.S.
But the point that I'm making that's just reaffirming that the innovation is in the United States.
So if we stop, they would start, or they would begin to catch up.
Well, they would continue. I don't see that.
Maybe
because the way the technology develops, even if it's not being developed in the United States, doesn't mean that other countries, or even if it's developed in other countries more slowly, doesn't mean that the technologies wouldn't be developed.
I actually hope that China and our other rivals across the country do develop and deploy these systems like we're doing in the U.S., because then they'll be plagged by goon bots and cheating.
And China already hasn't they? Like they've got
they're actually much more
facial recognition and stuff like that they use to control their populations.
Yeah, those are different questions from the goon bots. But yeah, the tendency to disappear up into one's own brainstem, I guess, is a human universal. I think if China begins to deploy recklessly their LLMs at the same scale as the U.S., but China has actually got really strict regulation, including protecting consumers, much more so than the U.S. And deep fakes, things like this, but also like any kind of anti-CCP output, that's all banned. But yeah, I think if China borgs out and weakens its population as we have, it would be kind of like payback for the fentanyl.
So what would you guys jump in on that? Do you guys think that the United States, because the U.S. is where the leading edge is, do you think that if the U.S. pulled back, other countries would also? Or because like I said, I think that just because a country lags behind the U.S. technologically doesn't mean they don't have the impulse or the desire to actually develop these technologies.
Without a doubt, there is something to this technology that's behind the goonbots, behind the particular instantiations of it, the applications, right?
1 second, I want to jump in. The idea of goonbots, like I understand that those are the flashy things and sex sells. I understand that, but that's really one of the smallest areas, and I think one of the least important. Right, because you're dealing with medical technology, AI and medical technology. You're dealing with AI in multiple different fields. Like it's almost becoming ubiquitous. I think that as much as people like to say, "Oh, the porn bots are going to kill us," or everyone's going to jump into the pod. I think that that's actually just kind of a more of a slander on the technology more than or a way to slander the technology. And again, this is not endorsing the idea of AI sex girlfriends or whatever, but even just the way that we're talking about it so far around the table, the goon bots. It's the point of saying that is to slander the technology. So
agreed. And there needs to be a positive vision for AI. Like what we need to understand, what is AI good for and what are humans good for? And ideally, we keep AI out of the areas where humans are most capable, and we're going to do just fine. Areas like our relationships, of course.
Yeah.
Areas like education and the core functions that basically people are experts in that AI is not experts in. So AI is good for doing work that's frankly less humane. So things that we don't like doing. Paperwork, administrative work, bureaucratic work, that kind of stuff.
And in domains where AI is not adding value or where it's obviously just terrible. So you think about when you go onto Twitter or just the algorithm at any point, you see an increasing amount of just AI slop. Or even in education, we've talked about like at a certain point, if the kids are just outsourcing all of their learning, we're going to figure that out. And that's something that will need to be corrected. If people are using AI in sort of strange or psychotic relationship dynamics, I think, again, we'll sort of figure that out and solve that as well. And really across all of these, my hope is that what will occur is that as we figure out that AI doesn't work well in this domain, it'll force people back into the in-person. One example here would be like, let's say, for example, Joe, like you and I were going to go on a show together, or just go do something together. If I have an AI agent, for example, that sort of spontaneously reaches out to you and messages you, and then your AI agent responds back, and it's scheduled, and maybe there's a whole conversation that happens, but neither of us are even aware that the conversation even happened, right? That's a pretty weird thing, and at a certain point, we sort of lose trust in those sorts of interactions where there isn't a firm handshake, where there aren't two people in the room together, and so I think the natural sort of second order consequence of this, at least it seems to me, that it'll force people to care more again about the in-person relationships. So people in their community, their family, their church, and also even things like proof of membership and sort of vetted organizations, or like word of mouth referrals, right? So somebody like Bryce basically says like, "Yo, you should really go do XYZ thing with Joe," and I know Bryce in person, and I wouldn't take that advice off of the internet anymore. So you sort of bias more towards input from in person. And in some ways, I think that solves some of the challenges we've been having with the internet and with social media, which has been terrible for young people, just in terms of anxiety and other things as well. And so what we want to have is a future with AI that doesn't look like Instagram, or doesn't look like what social media did to people. And I think it's possible.
Isn't it? Do you think it would be accurate to say that because of the algorithms that social media uses to put things in front of people, wouldn't that qualify as AI? And wouldn't the repercussions of having that kind of information, or the way that information is fed to people, particularly young people, would that qualify as one of the negatives of AI that we've already seen even in its infancy?
That's true, and I think it's worth bringing up the distinction between, I would say, the last generation of AI, which is what you see in algorithms and social media. It's what you see in drone warfare, but a lot of maybe more positive elements as well, like ability to detect fraud in financial systems. And there's a new generation of AI which started with the release of ChatGPT in 2022, and you could call that generative AI. You could call that large language models, but this is really the source of a lot of the hype in the last few years. And it's a source of where we can actually think about automating all the worst parts of our companies or our personal lives. But it's also the risk where the slop comes in, right? So all the tweets that you see that are clearly made by a robot, that's this second generation.
You know, you're going to have to find something for us to disagree about.
Well, I mean, I've tried pushing back on a bunch of stuff.
To your point, I will say this: you're talking about critical systems that are having AI integrated into them, medical, military.
Well, I mean,
very critical systems, right?
At least in the context of what I was thinking of was as assisting humans, not actually taking over.
Thanks for watching this clip from the Culture War podcast. We're live every Friday, 10 a.m. to noon, so subscribe and come hang out.